Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. So, hi everyone and welcome. Thanks for coming today. I'm excited to talk to you guys about feeding babies. This could be a time of kind of mixed emotions for a lot of people, especially if you're exclusively breastfeeding or mostly breastfeeding, that you're going from kind of your baby's source of all their nourishment to mixing that with solid food. So, a lot of people get excited about this, especially dads. Some moms get a little sad, and that's okay. So I've seen a lot of the same questions over and over from moms about starting solids. So maybe they went to their pediatrician's visit at 4 months and their doctor recommended starting with purees or rice cereal, but they've heard that that's not the best route, or their friend has told them about baby led weaning, but they're nervous. So I just wanted to have this hangout to kind of discuss the topic, give people some ideas of what their resources and options are, and take some questions at the end if we have time. So what I want to talk about today are the current age recommendations for starting solids and why. Some differences between starting with the more traditional purees versus this newfangled idea of baby led weaning and what exactly that entails and what foods you should start with. I also have a bunch of links and resources to share at the end, and that'll go up with the recording. So first I wanted to introduce myself. I know some of you, but if you don't know me, my name is Stacy Spenceley. I am a certified holistic health coach and live here in San Diego. And my coaching company is called Center Stage Wellness, where I support people to make sustainable lifestyle and diet changes. And I also am starting up semicrunchymama.com, which is based on all the things that I've learned in my parenthood journey and wanted to share with other people as the resource that I wish I had when I was pregnant. So I do have one son. His name is Ivor. He's 15 months old right now. And we started baby led weaning with him at 6.5 months old. And I'll kind of explain why we did that and that path for us. So let's dive in. So when should you start your baby on solids? And the old recommendation was 4 months. Current recommendations from major groups such as the World Health Organization and the American Association of Pediatrics is 6 months. And the reason is that around 6 months is when your baby's gut seals. So if you're not a big nutrition nerd like I am, which is fine, the 70% of your immune system is located in your gut, in your digestive tract. And so they're learning more and more right now about how important gut health is. I'm sure you've heard about probiotics and fermented foods and why you should drink kombucha and all this kind of stuff, and that's exactly why. And part of your gut health is that your gut is very permeable when you're first born, which is why preemies can have some real digestive problems. And it's so important for them to get breast milk, which is why they have donor milk, but that's another topic. So when you're first born, your gut's very permeable, and when you're just eating breast milk or formula, that's, you're getting the same thing over and over. Once you start introducing solids, it gets a little bit more complicated. And it's not a magical day at 6 months when your baby is suddenly ready for food. It's kind of a process. And one of the reasons is that we do want the baby's digestive tract to be sealed. And one reason for that is because it is so permeable. If we do this too early, particles from, like proteins from the foods that we're feeding them, can actually go through the gut and into the bloodstream. And what can happen is it can start causing some anti-inflammatory or some autoimmune responses, some allergies, things like that can cause problems down the line. We don't know this for sure, but it's why take chances, because you can't really go back. So of course you can't see your baby's digestive tract, and your baby doesn't know, and you can't exactly ask, hey baby, is your gut sealed? So the chances are higher of that happening at 6 months than they are at 4, which is one reason that they recommend waiting. So like I mentioned briefly before, usually it's dads who get super excited about food, oftentimes because they're not feeding the baby as much, and so this seems like a fun experiment, and feeding a lemon to your baby is hilarious, and it totally is. But sometimes this is when you guys are out at the zoo and suddenly you look over and dad's trying to feed baby some ice cream or something like that. So just something to think about. And oftentimes they'll say, oh, it's just a taste. Well, the baby is getting actually a lot of flavors. The baby is getting all the flavors during pregnancy through your amniotic fluid, and so they're introduced to a lot of taste then. So the more varied diet you ate when you were pregnant, the more varied their taste buds are going to be already ready for. They've actually done studies and shown that babies prefer flavors that are familiar to them, whether it's familiar through the amniotic fluid or through your breast milk. And the same thing is that a lot of flavors transfer through breast milk as well. So when you eat a different meal every day, your baby eats a different meal every day. So they are getting different flavors and experiences through your milk and even before birth. So one other reason to wait for me is that feeding a baby is fun, but it's very messy and it takes forever. Even at 15 months, my son is huge, and he still only eats 2 meals a day most days because it takes so much time, and he just doesn't eat that much. So something else interesting that I came across while I was collecting my resources for this was that a lot of the studies that support starting food at 4 months were actually funded by baby food companies because they have a vested interest. They have a very short window in which they can sell you baby food because babies grow so quickly, and they want you buying their products for an extra 2 months. So kellymom.com, which is one of my favorite breastfeeding resources online, says most babies are ready between 6 and 8 months. And there are a number of signs to look for. I'm sure you're familiar with some of them, but I want to go through the list because it's a little bit longer than most people anticipate, and it's not any one of these signs. So you really want to look for all of them. And the first one is that baby can sit up well without support. And the big reason for this one is choking. So the more able your baby is to hold him or herself up, the more likely he or she is to be able to handle their body well enough to prevent choking. The other thing is, if you have your baby propped up in a high chair and they can't support themselves very well and they start to slip, they're going to crouch down and maybe have some issues swallowing. So to prevent choking, that's going to be a better time to do that. Also, baby has lost their tongue thrust reflex. So the tongue thrust reflex is, you'll notice once your baby is past 6 weeks and is no longer reflexively sucking on everything, if you try to put something in their mouth, if you've ever tried to give a baby a pacifier who didn't want one, they'll push it back out with their tongue. And this is actually a protective mechanism. Basically, babies since they don't eat yet, they have this tongue thrust reflex to automatically push things out of their mouth so they don't accidentally swallow things and choke. So that one time you leave a penny on the floor, if they manage to get it, they're hopefully not going to swallow it and die. So they probably won't die, but they could choke. So that tongue thrust reflex also makes it very difficult for them to eat, because if they're trying to protect themselves by pushing everything out, it's difficult to eat, which includes taking things in. Baby is ready and willing to chew. Oftentimes this is really cute. You'll see them kind of mimicking you at dinner, and so we all like that. Baby is developing a pincer grasp, which is the Cheerio grasp, I guess, is when they can pick up individual small things. So they start by scraping food into the palm of their hand, and that's really not as developmentally appropriate for feeding solids as the pincer grasp is, because they can handle it better themselves. And baby is eager to participate in mealtime and may try to grab food and put it in their mouth. Most babies start putting everything in their mouth at 4 months, whether it's food or not. So a lot of people see this one thing of, oh, they're sticking everything in their mouth, they must be hungry, to mean that they want to eat food. And that's not necessarily true. It's a completely normal developmental step where that's how they're exploring the world. So my particular favorite, and I use the term loosely, is when baby isn't satisfied by nursing and still seems hungry. There's a lot of reasons that your baby could be hungry, especially around 4 to 6 months. There's growth spurts, there's teething, they may be learning to crawl, they may be going through a developmental leap, the weather may be hot or dry and they're thirsty. It's very difficult to know if baby wants to nurse a lot or still seems hungry or fussy afterwards, if it's because they're actually wanting solid food. So that one's a little challenging, and so I would recommend looking for the other ones a little bit first. Some myths about when babies should start is at a certain weight. So, oh, baby weighs 20 pounds, they must be hungry. Well, my baby was almost 15 pounds at 8 weeks. Some babies are 15 pounds at 12 months. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't or should start solids. They say a big baby is hungry because they need more food. Well, how did they get that big on just milk or formula? The other one is baby is small, so baby needs more food. That's actually funny, because if people want a baby to gain weight, breast milk or formula is going to be more calorically dense, and solids are actually not going to be as calorically dense, and they're not going to eat as much of them. So if you want to get your baby more calories to get them bigger, breast milk is actually going to be a better option than solids. Another one is that they need iron, which is sort of true. However, what they found is that the iron contained in breast milk is extremely bioavailable. So even in small amounts, your breast milk is perfectly conditioned to what your baby needs, and so your baby is absorbing a lot of that iron, where, you know, if we're getting heme iron from meat or non-heme iron from vegetables, it's not as well absorbed by our bodies, whereas iron in breast milk is exactly in the right package to do really well. So after 6 months, you do want to start offering complementary iron-rich foods just in case. But if you had to, like, cord clamping, if, you know, unless you had some certain problems, you had a preemie, I mean, there's always exceptions. But for the average baby, it's not going to be an issue. And you don't need to supplement iron unless your baby has been tested and found to be iron deficient. So another myth is that they say baby will sleep better once you start solids. And as somebody who has a 15-month-old who eats a ton of food and has slept 8 hours straight 3 times in his entire life, that's not a study, it's an anecdote, but it is definitely true for me. So solids don't necessarily help babies sleep better. And oftentimes, if you start early, it can actually cause them some GI distress because they're not used to digesting it. Think about if you've ever eaten a really heavy meal, or if you've eaten too much fruit, for example, and are having some tummy troubles. You know how to deal with it, but you're still not really a big fan. Whereas a baby's never experienced this before, and it can actually cause them to wake up more at night. So I will talk about rice cereal in a little bit, but I just want to throw in that a lot of people will advocate putting rice cereal in a bottle, and A, to sleep through the night, but B, to get them used to solids. Well, this is actually a choking hazard, is why I really wanted to put that one in there. And it can also replace breast milk or formula, which has more nutrients, with a non-nutritive substance. So that's something you really want to avoid, is rice cereal in the bottle. So if you're really excited and, oh, my kid is so ready, they're so smart, they're ready to eat at 3 months, well, there's a couple reasons to wait. So if you're breastfeeding, the more breast milk that your baby gets, the more immune protection they get. And again, 70% of that is in their gut. So if you're offering all those antibodies through your breast milk, especially once they start crawling and walking and they're getting into everything, they're interacting with other kids more, and they're getting sick all the time, the more antibodies you can provide, the better. It gives the baby's digestive system time to mature, like we talked about with the permeable gut. It can actually decrease risk of food allergies, and this is kind of a complicated issue, and I'll talk about it a little bit more towards the end. Helps protect baby from anemia. Again, you have a lot of bioavailable iron in your breast milk, and it helps maintain milk supply. You always want to nurse before you feed your baby solids, because once they start eating solids, they're very small tummies. I mean, their tummies are the size of a golf ball, about that age on average, and so babies who eat more solids are filling up their tummies with food instead of with milk. So it can also, this is not true for everybody, and I know several examples, but it can actually help space babies out. So the more that you're nursing more frequently, the less likely you are, although again, not always, to get your period back postpartum. So if you are preventing fertility because your baby thinks, "Ooh, I need all this nutrition for myself, I don't want to share with a sibling," it can actually help space babies. So, and it also makes feeding solids easier because your baby can feed themselves. And I try not to get into the causation correlation a lot, but they have found that babies who are allowed to self-feed have better relationships with food and lower incidence of obesity later in life. So, and I have some resources for you guys too. So, if you're now convinced that you should wait until at least closer to 6 months, and absolutely, if your baby is hitting all of those milestones at 5 months, there's no reason not to start. But if you had a preemie who, you know, is maybe not quite sitting up by him or herself by 6 months, 7 months, it's okay to wait. You're not hurting anything. They're still going to learn to eat. So how do you actually get started? So I would say step one is to get a high chair or booster seat and let baby sit at the table and play with just a bowl and spoon. You don't need to give them any food, but a big part of learning to eat is not just the actual chewing and swallowing and experiencing the foods, but it's also experiencing mealtime and how it's part of, you know, how we eat as a society, how to sit at the table, that there's conversation, that it goes back and forth, and kind of having baby learn those mechanics of mealtime. Also, before you start, I would strongly recommend taking a class or brushing up on your infant CPR and choking responses. The vast majority of parents never have an issue, and if you do baby-led weaning appropriately, it can really reduce your chances of having a choking incident. But in the event that something happens, you really want to be ready. So I honestly, for the first 2 weeks, probably every time before I fed my son a meal, I would review the choking protocol of putting him over your arm and hitting him on the back, because it just made me feel better that if anything happened, I knew what to do. So kind of the difference between purees and baby-led weaning, and I want to say that baby-led weaning is a British term, and the term weaning just for them means introducing solids, because as you introduce solids, it does decrease the amount of milk your baby is drinking. It doesn't mean necessarily stopping breastfeeding, which is what we mean here in the US. So you can also call baby-led solids, but the book is called baby-led weaning. So you can do a mix. What happened for us was that we started with baby-led weaning. We were going to add some purees just to see how he did with them, and he threw them all up, and I got tired of it, and so I stopped doing purees. He's fine. But with purees, baby learns to swallow first, because you're just giving them this pureed substance and kind of poking it down their throat, in their mouth. But they learn to swallow first, then you gradually introduce lumpier food and solids so that they learn how to chew second. With baby-led weaning is they learn to chew first, and a lot of times they won't ingest anything for quite a while, and that's totally okay, because they're learning to chew first and then to swallow, because they're both different skills. And again, it's not necessarily better or worse, but they need to learn how to chew so that they can swallow more effectively to prevent choking when they have those chunkier foods. Purees became especially common when the recommendation was starting foods at 4 months, because they generally don't have teeth, although that's not really an issue. And they usually haven't lost their tongue thrust reflex, so they can't chew because they just push everything out of their mouth. So if you bypass that reflex, you can get a puree down their mouth, but a lot of times they'll still gag. So babies don't need teeth to eat. If you've ever stuck your finger in a baby's mouth and had them gum your finger, you know they can bite very hard, even without teeth. And a lot of times the foods that we're starting with, you don't really need teeth to bite anyway. So they can break those pieces up, or they'll dissolve depending on the foods, even without teeth. Their gums are firm and their jaws are strong. So with purees and solid foods, babies will have their preferences. Like I mentioned earlier, familiar flavors are going to be more popular. But do remember, it can take over a dozen exposures for them to try something new. I think it's kind of funny. I'm one of like 3 people in the world who doesn't like blueberries, and my son doesn't particularly care for them either. There are other foods that I love that he doesn't like, and his favorite food right now is roasted seaweed, which I'll tolerate it on sushi, but that's about it. So don't give up just because you try to offer carrots once they don't eat carrots. That doesn't mean they don't like carrots. It means it's new, they're not ready. Give it another go. Don't worry. So, and remember, it's not just about the flavor, but they're also learning about different smells, different colors, different textures. I've learned that my son only likes carrots if they're cut in wide, thin planks and sauteed in butter, or raw. If any other shape, he will not eat them. Beats me. Babies are weird. So they're learning, and you're giving them a different experience, even if they're not necessarily eating the food or ingesting the food. So baby-led weaning is very simple. It simply means you let the baby feed themselves. So you put food in front of baby and let baby eat what baby wants. So the first rule of baby-led weaning is that nobody puts anything in baby's mouth except for baby. So it's none of the open the hanger door, none of the flying the spoon into the mouth. You can give them a preloaded spoon filled with food. That's how I fed my son oatmeal this morning. He didn't want to do his own spoon today. But that really helps cut down on choking, because you can't bypass any of their own protective mechanisms if they're the ones in control. The other part of that is then you really don't want to, if anything should happen, you don't want to stick your finger in baby's mouth for the same reason, as it can actually make it worse. So that definitely reduces the chances of choking, and again, like I mentioned, it sets them up for success later by letting them listen to their body's hunger cues, eating what they want, instead of having it be a struggle. And that's the thing too, is you don't have to convince them to eat anything. You put them in front of it, put it in front of them, and they eat if they want, they ignore it if they want, and there's no pressure on you. You can actually just eat your dinner. It's amazing. So you start with soft finger foods that baby can grasp themselves, and they're improving their hand-eye coordination, and they'll get better as they get older. So the caveat is that babies should not have as much salt as we do. Their systems are very small and very delicate, and too much salt can upset their electrolyte balance. So Baby Led Weaning does advocate not adding any salt to your home-cooked foods. My take on that as a health coach is that 80% of the salt in our modern diets come from restaurant and processed foods. So if you're eating at home, I don't think a pinch of salt in a quart of pasta water is really going to overdo it, because they're not going to be eating that much anyway. But just be careful, and if you're feeding them, it's one thing if you're cooking at home. If you're out, you may want to just be careful with restaurant foods because they are very salt heavy. So, but the focus is really on having baby participate in mealtime, and then you just give them the same food that you're eating the majority of the time. We did start with some different foods because it was summer and I was just not eating sweet potato fries for every meal. But you don't have to necessarily prepare separate meals. We share oatmeal in the morning, we share yogurt for a snack, we share apples for a snack, things like that. That I just give him half of my food. The problem is when I wanted all of my food and I'm still hungry. So what foods should I start with? And I forgot to mention, also, whichever path you take, whether you do purees or solids, or Baby Led Weaning style, make sure you start offering water. And you do this in a straw cup, a sippy cup, an open cup. But when you're giving them breast milk and formula, it's 90% liquid. So when you're switching over to solids, fiber is good for us to clear out our systems, but they're not used to it. So having that additional fiber, they need additional water to help them digest. So just start with an ounce or two. You don't want to overdo it at first, but it can lead to constipation if they're dehydrated slightly. So you don't want that. So what do you start with? So I just want to talk for a minute about rice cereal, which has been a very common suggestion. And right now, rice cereal is kind of not recommended, mostly because it doesn't really have any nutritional value. And the reason it was recommended is because it's a very low chance of allergic reaction. It's very few people are allergic to rice. So you can try that, give baby a taste of a texture or something a little bit thicker, but the likelihood of them being allergic to it is very, very low. The problem is that, especially white rice, it's all the nutrition has been stripped away, and it's basically just sugar. So the argument is that, breast milk and formula are also very sweet because they contain natural sugars and things like that, at least in breast milk it does. But there's also other nutrients and vitamins and minerals, whereas with rice cereal, you're basically just getting basic carbohydrates, which break down into starch and doesn't add anything to the baby's experience. It's just empty calories. It's like, would you feed your kid? I mean, a Snickers bar actually at least has peanuts in it. So breast milk is sweet, but it's not going to have, and it also has antibodies. You might as well just feed baby a sugar cube at that point. So it is fortified with iron, but again, there's other ways. If you're breastfeeding, you're fine, and there's other nutrient-rich foods that have iron in them that you can offer baby instead. So another common thing I've heard is saying that you shouldn't offer fruit first, because if you offer fruit, they'll prefer sweet foods and will never eat vegetables. And I've actually found this to not be true in my personal experience, and studies have shown it as well, that, my son, he'll pass over fruit most of the time. He'd rather eat mushrooms. So I have a huge sweet tooth. I love fruit. I eat fruit all the time. I'll offer it to him. He just isn't into it so much. So if you're eating fruit, give him fruit. If you're eating vegetables, give him vegetables. It doesn't really make a big difference. And again, breast milk is naturally sweet. They're getting a lot of natural sweetness anyway, so it's not going to push over a preference. If you never offer vegetables, absolutely. And you do have a shorter window to offer new foods in general once they're a toddler, but it's not going to mean they're never going to eat veggies. So some very popular choices for first foods, particularly here in California, are avocado. It's great. It's healthy fats. It's green. It's a veggie. Well, it's technically a fruit. Good for them. Delicious. Easy to take with you. Sweet potato, cut it up like fries. Squash, all kinds of different squash, roasted or cut up. We also did cucumber and green beans very early on. He loved green beans. They're just the right size. Now he eats them raw. Cucumber is great, especially once they start teething. They can gum that. They won't necessarily eat a lot of it. For fruit, we did peaches and pears. We did carrots, beets, broccoli, cauliflower, zucchini, apples. The trick is finding a shape your baby can pick up. And earlier on, bigger sticks are better. So think, sweet potato fries, although I'd bake them. Again, like, you know, big chunks of broccoli that they can gnaw on, things like that. Once they start getting their pincer grasp, you can do smaller pieces, different shapes. I switched it up as he started getting older, just because he would like to play and practice picking things up with his pincer grasp. The only ones I would caution against are tomatoes, because those little cherry tomatoes can be a choking hazard, and grapes as well. You'll want to cut those up. They're a little hard to pick up early on anyway. Also, some people do like to hold off on dairy and citrus because they can be allergenic. So you basically just plop the food on the tray and let baby have it. Clearly make sure it's not too hot. My baby didn't have a huge preference between hot food and cold food, or warm food and cold food, I should say, and let him go. And so what about choking? Again, it's not very common, but my best advice is actually to watch YouTube videos of baby-led weaning babies, because a very, very common reaction, especially early on, is gagging. And basically, it's when they're overcoming that tongue thrust reflex and getting used to it, they have a very strong gag reflex. So they'll get a little bit of food to the back of their mouth, and their body's like, ooh, I don't know what this is about, it might be dangerous. And so their eyes might turn red, they might cough, they'll be gagging and spitting and maybe throwing up a little bit. Kind of gross, but it's also terrifying the first time it happens. So if you look and watch a video of somebody else having that happen, then it's a little bit less scary because you know it's normal. My rule is that if they're coughing, they're breathing, and if they're breathing, they're not choking, because choking means that people use this term in it back and forth a lot, and it's not true. But choking means that their airway is obstructed, so they've inhaled something and it's blocking their airway and they can't breathe. And what will happen is they'll look at you, they can't make any noise because they can't get any air through, and they'll kind of track you and look at you, and that's bad. If they're coughing, they're breathing, and that means they're gagging. And the best thing you can do is leave them alone, because they're going to work it out themselves. If they're really having trouble, again, they're still breathing, so they're not being hurt. It's probably just miserable to watch. If you're really worried, you could try to do the choking maneuver and pick them up and put them over your arm and pat them out. But the best thing to do is honestly to let them work it out. Again, don't stick your finger in their mouth. You can actually lodge it in worse and then actually cause them to choke. So I know that sounds really scary. It's never happened to me. Gagging has. Choking's never happened. So, and we've been doing this for 9 months. So other tips. My pediatrician's questionnaire at 6 months asked if my son was getting 3 meals a day, and I laughed because ain't nobody got time for that. So don't worry about feeding them 3 times a day. I would recommend starting with once. And if you work, say, 9 to 5-ish, and you don't have time in the morning, and you just do it in the evenings, that's fine. You maybe do a little bit more on weekends. If you have a history of food allergies, you may want to wait 3 to 4 days between new foods, just so that if they do have a reaction, then you know what the food was. The top 8 allergenic foods are dairy, soy, wheat, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, and shellfish. So other people also have a little bit of trouble with citrus, as I mentioned, dairy, which was on that list, and strawberries and mango are other common ones, so just something to keep an eye on. But one thing to know is that your baby isn't allergic to something before they've eaten it. So I hear a lot of people will be like, well, you know, we have a history of allergies, and so we fed my son his first spoonful of peanut butter in the pediatrician's office before his appointment. In case something happened, we'd be at the doctor's already. Well, the first exposure isn't going to do anything to them. It's, you know, it's like your burglar alarm doesn't go off before they break into your house. They actually have to break in first. So the first exposure, your body is like, oh, hey, peanuts. The second exposure, they're like, I'm not sure if I like peanuts. The third exposure, they're like, oh, there's a little bit more going on, I don't know. And the fourth exposure is often when they'll actually have a reaction if they're allergic to something. Other things like tomatoes, citrus, strawberries, acidic foods can often cause a little bit of a diaper rash, because after the baby poops, especially you'll find you're going to become a diaper detective, and you'll see exactly what's coming out and what they're digesting versus what they're just chewing. But those acidic foods will still be in little chunks, and it can irritate their skin on the way out. So just to be aware of that. It doesn't necessarily mean they have an allergy. I know my son had a contact dermatitis reaction as his face got a little red after eating something with cinnamon on it. So you may want to wait 3 to 4 days between foods. And if you are worried, try feeding new foods in the morning So if you are waiting in between, wait until Saturday or Sunday morning to try a new food, because the other thing is if they do get sick from it, then you're not up all night with a sick baby. You're up all day with a sick baby, and you're going to be awake anyway. We made that mistake once. It turned out to be a tummy bug, but it was miserable. So it's going to be messy, and that's okay. The sooner you accept it, however, the easier it will be. We got some really great bibs that have pouches, and then they wipe flat, and we got an inexpensive high chair from IKEA that we literally just hose off outside. Done. We also often just feed the baby in his diaper right before bath time. I mentioned this earlier, but make sure you nurse first. Even if they do really do well on solids and love eating, 2 bites of carrot is not going to make or break their ability to join Mensa later in life. It's nutritious, but it's a tiny, tiny amount compared to the amount of breast milk that they're still getting. They find that babies who are fed first tend to wean sooner because they don't need that nutrition anymore. And also, don't overwhelm baby. This is a struggle I still have with my husband sometimes, is put a few pieces of food in front of baby, or they tend to get overwhelmed. They're very small, they're very young, and this is new to them, and if you give them too many options, it becomes a game, and the dreaded windshield wiper arm comes out, and suddenly your food is all on the floor, and you're very sad. So also, don't worry about it too much. My son, he's huge, and he barely ingested anything for at least 2 months. So he would chew on stuff, it would fall out of his mouth. He would eat a couple things, and we'd find, a speck in his diaper. But, it's all about learning, it's all about the experience, and don't worry. So that's where the saying comes from, food before 1 is just for fun. Some babies don't really get into food until after a year. He definitely had about 8.5 months, he got a little bit more excited about it. At 10 months, he started eating a little bit more, but it wasn't really until after a year that he started eating very much. And now at 15 months, we will sometimes order him his own kids' meal that lasts him for 2 or 3 days. So, and he's almost 27 pounds. So the more important thing to look at, as opposed to dates or times or weights, is to look at your baby and see, is my baby happy? Is my baby enjoying food? Am I enjoying feeding my baby? And stress out less about, oh my God, he doesn't like carrots. He's, never going to win a Nobel Prize. Not that big a deal. So those are the basic premises. The basic premise of Baby Led Weaning. I hope you found it helpful. I know we had a couple of questions that people wanted me to answer that they've submitted. So let's see. Julie asked, my daughter's been doing baby led weaning for about 3 weeks now, and last night at dinner, we noticed when she gets a piece of food in her mouth, she actually chews and swallows it instead of immediately pushing it out with her tongue. So she's learning to control her gag reflex. It's very exciting. So when we first started, I had a lot of questions about when she'd actually eat something. Apparently the answer was a few weeks. Good. Excellent. So yeah, so again, people freak out because they'll take a bite of food and spit it out, and they're like, well, this is a waste of time. But it's just learning. It's, you don't expect them to, get up and say the Gettysburg Address for their first word. So it's the same thing, as you have to let them practice. We answered that one about gagging, if you just leave them alone. But other than that, trying to see, do we have other questions? If you guys have questions, you can put them in the chat box. I thought I'd be able to see you, but apparently I cannot. So, I didn't do my last one online, and so now I'm trying to figure out. Well, it says they're questions, but it's not really telling me what they are. So, well, I hope you guys found that helpful, and this recording will be up with, again, I have a resource list of helpful articles, some of the studies that I've talked about, since I really like to know the evidence for why to do something, but I know some people like to read the studies and some people don't. But instead of citing them all in the talk, I wanted to link to them later. But other than that, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to contact me and stay in touch. You can go to semicrunchymama.com or facebook.com/semicrunchymama, and I'd love to connect with you there. I'm hoping to offer some more of these talks on different topics, especially for older kids. I want to do one on the division of responsibility in feeding, which makes it a lot less stressful to feed your picky toddler. So thanks again for coming. Again, my name is Stacey Spenceley, and I appreciate your time. Have a great day.